Long days, pleasant nights, and welcome to Kingslingers, a Doof Media podcast journeying through Stephen King's Dark Tower series and beyond. I'm your host, constant reader Scott Daly, and I think we should just do it right here.
And I'm your co-host, relative King newbie Matt Freeman, and do the podcast right here on the grass in the open.
Sure. Well, why not?
But people can see.
Doesn't that just kind of make it more exciting?
All right, whatever. Let's do this.
This week on the show, children start dying and Ben and Susan's relationship heats up as we discuss Chapter 4, Danny Glick and Others, and Chapter 5, Ben 2. Matt, what did you think of this week's reading?
This is some great stuff. The Danny Glick and Others part, I think, was a real kind of tone shift, real kind of like velocity shift of the story. I feel like things have really like the up until now, there's been kind of a feeling of setting the table. And I don't know if I wouldn't say we're out of the setting the table part of the story yet, but definitely there was like an escalation, an acceleration feeling to things. Mm-hmm. And then getting back to Ben was good. It was kind of neat to like pick up those threads again and I guess I wasn't sure whether Ben was going to be kind of de-emphasized as like the protagonist. And then when getting back to Ben, I was like, okay, so like, no, Ben is still the protagonist. We're basically going to be switching between Ben and like town intervals or interludes. It's sort of how I'm seeing it at this point.
Sure. Yeah. I mean, we'll definitely find out, but I think that'd be a fair guess at this point for sure.
That's how it seems so far.
Yeah. I mean, I like that. Like Chapter 4 is almost kind of a continuation of the town. Yeah. Like the fact that it is Danny Glick and Others. It's not. Right. It's not the Lot Chapter 2. We'll be doing that next week, but it is. We jump around a lot throughout this chapter. Yeah.
I mean, I think as we get into it, I'll have some things to say about the way in which it feels different, even from the previous Lot chapters.
Sure, definitely. But before we do that, just a really quick announcement for everyone. We talked about this last week. We're going to talk about it again this Friday at 9:30 p.m. Our book club will be meeting for the month. We are going to be discussing Old Man's War, the John Scalzi military science fiction novel. So if you've read that book before, or even if you haven't, there's still time. Get the book, read it, and then join us at 9:30 over on our YouTube channel. We'll spend a couple hours talking about the book, interacting with you guys, and just really diving into this book. I think if you like this, you'll enjoy it, I think.
Yeah, and it's always fun to attend live, or so I hear, since I'm always the one actually doing
I
it.
Mean, but you are attending live, definitely.
Yeah. But it makes the conversation more fun the more people we have chiming in. So if you have read that book, absolutely, like Scott said, Friday at 9:30 Central Time. And
if you are sitting here and wondering, why do they always do science fiction books and never do horror books? Because you're probably a fan of horror. Well, you can have something to say about that, because one of our benefits for all of our patrons across all of our levels is the ability to vote in our monthly book club votes. The vote for next month is happening right now, so there's still time if you want to join our Patreon. If you're thinking about doing it, now's a great time to do it anyway, because you'll be able to vote for next month's book and maybe make sure that the non-sci-fi book wins, because it seems like whenever there's a science fiction book, it always wins.
Yeah. Please do that. Please help us out.
I'm not complaining, but I'm just assuming that our this fictional person, possibly, or real person, is complaining.
Yeah. Well, fictional person, you know what to do.
All right, let's get into it and begin this week's discussion with Chapter 4, Danny Glick and Others. And we begin this chapter right where the last one left off, with Danny and Ralphie Glick missing. But we get one of them back pretty quick, Matt, as Danny stumbles from the trees back to his house. But he doesn't remember anything about what happened. The town goes on the alert and goes looking for poor Ralphie Glick. And we kind of fast forward a little bit here. We kind of move across days as the search for Ralphie Glick gets more and more hopeless. But in the meantime, Danny collapses on the way back to the bathroom and is taken to the hospital, where they can't figure out what's going on with him.
Yeah, I mean, this is an incredibly intense sort of whirlwind, isn't it? Like that paragraph that you just said, it could have, like, it contains the plot beats that could be spread across like 50 pages, right? But no, it's King just really moves us through it at a fair clip, and it carries this feeling of escalation and intensification of the plot.
Yeah, I mean, if there was anything that we could call an inciting incident in this book, this seems to be it, right?
Mhm.
I mean, obviously, I think the true inciting incident is Straker and Barlow coming to town, and to a lesser extent, Ben coming to town. But this is really where the things kick off,
Mhm.
because it's children.
Yeah, right. And it's, as far as we know, it's the first time that anyone has been victimized directly by these creatures. So yeah, that definitely.
Of course, Matt, we know that by the end of this week's reading, Danny Glick will be dead. But I wonder, what was your reaction right here in this moment where this kid appears and then something immediately is wrong with him and they can't figure out what it is? Were you instantly like, oh, okay, he's going to be a vampire?
No, I was like, I was thinking that like his life force was being like slowly sucked away by the vampire still. Like,
so he's like from a distance?
Like from it, yeah, like magically. Like his like I guess the thing is, you never quite know what you're getting, right? You never quite know if it's going to be like the vampire literally drinks the blood, or like this is a magic vampire that's sort of stealing the person's essence and maybe remotely and maybe over a period of time. Which I mean, it sort of reminds me of like Dandelo, where it's more of a metaphysical thing than a physical thing. And honestly, I still don't know exactly what we're looking at here in terms of what these vampires, do, because the book has very, cagily hidden that from us.
Yeah. So. I mean, that's kind of actually where I wanted this starting part of the conversation to go, because you kind of think back to when this book was released. Did people know this was a vampire story? Mm-hmm. Like, you look at the book, even the original cover, there's nothing there that says vampire. You wonder what, like, the words on the back of it, like the words on the back of the version I have nothing to do with vampires. And of course, we know this is the vampire story, one, because Salem's Lot is like culturally the vampire one, and two, because we're coming at this from the Dark Tower. But I just wonder what a person in 1975 opening this book would know. I mean, I think anytime you're writing a story like this, you have to write it from the perspective of nobody knows what this is about until I specifically tell them, right? So it's kind of fun to kind of imagine what King is trying to do with Danny Glick here, that the mystery that starts this thing is, what the hell is going on here? What happened to Ralphie? What is happening to Danny? What is this?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, it's funny because I would have figured that the dust jacket would say something about vampires. But yeah, I really don't know how long it would have taken me to figure it out if somebody just handed me this book and said, here, it's a good book, have fun.
I tried to find out what the original thing on the dust jacket in 75 was. I couldn't, but the one I have, you want me to read it to you?
Sure.
Ben Mears has returned to Jerusalem's Lot in hopes that exploring the history of the Marston house, an old mansion long subject to rumor and speculation, will help him cast out his personal devils and provide inspiration for his new book. But when two young boys venture into the woods and only one returns alive, Mears begins to realize that something sinister is at work. In fact, his hometown is under siege from the forces of darkness, and only he, with a small group of allies, can hope to contain the evil that is growing within the borders of this small New England town. So yeah, nothing about vampires in there.
Yeah, right. I mean, it's interesting because it's almost like it focuses way more on the house, like the fact of this haunted house.
Which is true of at least these 4 or 5 chapters we've talked about, right? I mean, like I kind of mentioned last week, we were 100 pages in, still no vampires. Here we are again this week, 200 pages into a 650-page book. There are vampires, but like, we haven't actually seen them yet. Right. Like, we still don't know anything about Mr. Barlow other than his name, except for what we know coming from Dark Tower.
Yeah. I mean, honestly, I end this section with more questions than answers. And I'm going to talk about that as we go, because I think this is one of those things that might be fun for people to hear, for the first time reader to just struggle and and because so many things probably seem obvious once you know the truth of them, but King is doing a lot where he's implicating and implying and hinting, but you're never really quite sure who's who and what's what. We'll get into that as we go, though. Yeah,
I mean, it's so fascinating because I guess we should just get to that when we get to it. So, because I have a lot to say about the picking up the luggage at the docks section.
Yeah, for sure.
Which is just dripping with like OG vampire lore. Like, it's really wonderful.
Yeah.
But we'll get there.
Yeah.
So back at the Eva boarding house, Ben comes in after searching for Ralphie Glick and finds Susan Norton there to make him dinner. It's this adorable scene that I think really goes to show the growing relationship between the two of them, or at least on Susan's side.
Yeah.
I love this line here. Susan covered the casserole, put it in the oven, and then went out on the back porch to wait for it. The sun was going down, red and inflamed. It's very fun to kind of observe the ways in which the story is using darkness and light and daytime and nighttime imagery throughout the book so far, right? I mean, these are very charged things because we know it's a vampire story. And here in this instance, the sunlight is reflecting Susan's passion for Ben.
I like that. I like the idea that like day and night are being contrasted. We've also heard, there have been a few references, and here we're seeing the sun go down. We've heard references to the sunrise. So like the sunrise and the sunset are these two liminal periods between day and night, where it seems like the story keeps referencing sunrise and sunset.
Sure.
And so I guess I want to keep paying attention to that. I guess I'm just like, in terms of symbols, you're right. Like I want to pin down like every time day, night, sunrise, sunset are mentioned, it seems like could be useful. But yeah, I think as you're kind of saying here, Susan has obviously fallen harder for Ben than he has for her. That's a beat that I think is going to be consistent throughout this chapter.
Yeah, I definitely want to circle back around to that when we have our second chapter and the events that happen there, because I think that this is kind of teeing that up, and I think it pays off really wonderfully in that Ben chapter.
Yeah.
And it kind of to build the contrast here, like on the other side of this whole thing, we have Ben while Susan is going outside and looking, and we see this red and inflamed sun to represent like an inflamed passion in some ways. What is Ben doing? He's looking at the Marston house again. So Ben, he was looking up at the Marston house, not really listening. The shutters were closed. They would open later on after dark. The shutters would open after dark. He felt a morbid chill at the thought, and it's nearly incantatory quality.
Yeah.
First of all, that just incantatory is a wonderful word. I love that. I've never actually seen the word incantatory used, but it's perfect.
Yeah. And here Ben continues to be a writer who would use that sort of thought in his own mind.
Of course.
Right.
But yeah, we have, so if Susan is representing the bright flaming passion, Ben is in this paragraph not really listening to what she's saying, first of all, and he's looking up at the house, thinking about darkness, thinking about chill, thinking about scariness, darkness. And so that's the contrast between these two characters right now.
Yeah, his mind is almost entirely elsewhere, and she is intensely present with him, and this is very clear. And I don't really know what direction we're going with this in the long term. Like, it seems to me that the tragedy here is likely going to be the man is haunted by his past, and he is going to continue to make further mistakes in the present because he can't let go of what can be changed. And, he's going to he's basically going to miss out on the opportunity to be with this woman in the present because he's so stuck in the past. That seems like the shape of the thing that I'm expecting. I guess I'm just signposting that so that I can either be gloriously right or hilariously wrong later.
Yeah, I like that. I mean, to kind of put some thoughts into Susan's head that we haven't explicitly been told yet, but like she can see Ben as the horizon, as hope, as, we know she wants to get out of this town. We know she feels she has to get out of this town. And he is a man who is coming back to this town. He wants to be here. He wants to recapture something. He wants to face something. And that's two different directions. And that these characters are kind of not facing each other. They're looking at different things. And
right.
That's not a good sign.
Yeah, they both like each other quite a lot, but they actually want very different things. And they're at very different places in their lives. And that's not something that either of them are really thinking about very much.
We then cut back to our good pal, Larry Crockett, who is once again incessantly talking about his assistants, Jahoobies. I'm sure they're very nice, Larry.
Yeah, it's sort of beautiful in its way. Her Jahoobies are his pole star.
It's sort of beautiful in its way. Sure, Matt.
He's just been so consistently fixated on the Jahoobies for such a long period of time that
that's very true.
It becomes admirable. Does it become admirable?
I'm sure his assistant feels that way.
I mean, you have to admire like steadfastness, right? You got to hand it to him.
You absolutely do not gotta hand it to Lawrence Crockett. Speaking of which, I think King it's interesting that we met this guy in the lot section, right? Which is a section where we learn a lot about our characters, but then King kind of uses this chapter to really dive into who this person was. We last chapter learned about the previous deal he had with Straker, but this is where we learn about his past, truly. Because this guy was a millionaire even before R.T. Straker came knocking on his door, because he cornered the trailer park market and then made a killing through illegal tax dodges he basically owned trailer park manufacturing. He owned the real estate that he's selling to people. So he's getting all corners of this whole thing and not reporting any of it. I really like how he describes it. He described the process as going into the tunnel of love with girl A, screwing girl B in the car behind you, and ending up holding hands with girl A on the other side. He ended up buying mobile homes from himself, and these incestuous businesses were so healthy, they were almost frightening. So Larry seems like one of the most ambiguously bad people in all of Salem's Lot, huh?
Yeah, I mean, as skeezy as he seemed last week, this week he's revealed to just be a plain and simple criminal and con man.
Yeah.
It's also sort of funny to me how it's like, dude, it seems like your businesses were going to be really successful even if you didn't literally dodge taxes. Like, why'd you have to do that? And I think that's just the personality that he has.
Yeah.
He's going to try to go for the con no matter what, which, is maybe in a sense why the vampires chose him as their liaison.
Yeah, I mean, you're right, because we're told specifically he was a millionaire before this. And so, like, yes, of course, another $4 million plus sure would be nice, but like, he knows the deal is sketchy. And like, it'd be one thing to be a real estate agent that's like barely breaking even, and then a really sketchy deal comes across and you're like, I need this, I'll roll the dice on this. But he's a guy who's doing fine, who's actually, we see here, worried that he's making too much money because it's becoming harder and harder to hide the money. And yet, he can't help but jump at the greed here. That's so core to who he is.
Right. I mean, I think greed is the word at the top of his character sheet. It defines him. Absolutely.
Yeah.
I really enjoyed the little discussion of the trailer economic angle. Like I imagine that King happened to read like a magazine article about some sort of real estate scam involving trailers or something, and then he got obsessed with it and did a bunch of research, and then he's like, I gotta write this in the story somehow, which I don't know if I have no idea if any of that is true, but just like it's just, I guess it's kind of a thing with me where I really love it when in the midst of a story the writer kind of takes you on a little aside about this interesting thing out in the real world that they discovered. I mean, one of my favorite authors, Neil Stephenson, does this like as his thing, basically.
Sure.
His books are basically like, here's a bunch of cool shit that I was reading about recently wrapped in a plot.
Yeah, I know you wouldn't listen to me if I was just talking to you about it in conversation, so I put it in a narrative for you.
Exactly.
That's great. So Straker calls up our friend Larry and has a mission for him. He needs to hire a truck and go down to the docks and pick up some packages. Most of them will be going directly to their future antique store, but one of them, a sideboard, will need to be sent to the basement of the Marston house and is definitely not a vampire in a coffin.
Obviously. It's a sideboard. So, I had to look up what a sideboard was because that's just not a word that I've ever heard used in the South. Maybe, I don't know. Maybe it's a regional thing. Maybe I'm just an idiot. But what was really fun was I was just coincidentally, this is a true story, I was coincidentally having a long, low dresser delivered to my house on exactly the same day that I read this chapter.
So a sideboard?
So a sideboard. And so it was delivered and brought and installed. And then I just had to just kind of check in the drawers to make sure that it was actually a dresser and not, a coffin on the inside. So.
Yeah. For those that don't know, a sideboard is like like Matt said, it's like a low, side table that has a bunch of drawers in it that for like plates and napkins, and I think it's called a buffet table in some places as well.
Okay, all right,
that's a sideboard.
Gotcha.
And that's definitely what's in this box. Definitely
just a sideboard. Yeah. So I mean, this was one case where I was okay. So that's the coffin. Okay, but then I guess we're gonna get into it. But it leaves me a bit confused about who's in the coffin. Let's just. Yeah,
we'll get there. Yeah. But this begins like another truly horror-filled sequence, right? Where we meet two characters here. We have Royal Snow and Hank Peters, two lackeys for Lawrence. They head down to the wharf to pick up Straker's stuff. And it's really, I mean, this is straight up horror at this point.
Yeah, holy crap. I love this whole bit here.
It's so good. And of course, as we've kind of hinted at the beginning, it's playing into vampire lore. I believe Dracula starts, or not, maybe not starts, but like one of the very early scenes in Bram Stoker's Dracula is a scene at the docks where they're unloading a box that definitely has a coffin in it. And there's a lot of creepiness that comes with the arrival of the vampire.
Okay, that's great.
But almost immediately when these two guys get to the wharf, something seems wrong. They see all these rats and they're freaked out about wharf rats because they're not like normal rats. And there's no custom stamp on the sideboard. That's strange because they would have stamped the hell out of it. Hank knows because he used to work at the docks before.
Of course he did. Yeah.
He feels, I think I love that they says something undefinable is wrong here. He doesn't know what it is, but he just knows something's wrong, but they have a job to do anyway. And they lift the sideboard onto the truck along with a dozen items of inventory for the antique store.
Yeah. I think that's one really interesting thing about the way King is doing the horror here is the way in which these men are portrayed as being extremely agitated and terrified without really understanding why. Is great. Like it's just this primordially ambient evil with no specific source. Like they don't really know what they're scared of.
Yeah.
But it's just like affecting their bodies almost. Like and I don't know. I thought that was really kind of possibly unique in all of the things that I've ever read. Just the idea that like they're legitimately scared shitless, even though like one of them is a Vietnam vet, and is going to talk about that in a minute. But like, yeah, it's just I found it very interesting and unique and very effective. Sure,
yeah. So the drop off at the antique store goes without a hitch, but there is something weirdly wrong there too. There's a smell, there's an odor, an unpleasant one, but he could not have said exactly what it reminded him of. It was dry and acrid in the nostrils, like a whiff of old corruption. And they just reason that the place has been stuffed up too long, but there's something else wrong here.
Yeah, I guess this is where I'll dump some of my questions that have been accumulating. And maybe like I was supposed to figure all this out and it was supposed to be obvious, but like, okay, so the sideboard is the coffin, but then I become confused about where the vampire is. Like, is the vampire in the coffin, or is the vampire already in the lot? Because how else would he have attacked the boys if the vampire wasn't in the lot? And then I'm like, okay, well, if the vampire is already in the lot, then what's the deal with the coffin? And then I'm like, okay, well, maybe there's two vampires. Maybe Straker is actually a vampire, which is not something that I had actually considered until I started trying to puzzle through this. I was like, maybe there's two vampires and just one of them is like a bigger, more scary vampire, and Straker is like a lower vampire. And if so, then that could make some sense because like whoever, you have to kind of assume that the vampire has been spending some time in the antique store, which and Barlow's not even here yet unless he is. So,
sorry, I'm enjoying you just going.
I'm intentionally just going, but like I'm sure this will all clear up and it'll all be obvious in retrospect. But like I at this point, I guess I just have like a superposition of multiple guesses as to what exactly is going on. And the thing is, it doesn't really matter. Like, it's not like I need to know the answers to this. It's just like, I guess the fact that I'm so full of questions is actually kind of amping up my like uncertainty and thus kind of like feeling of being prey alongside the characters.
Sure.
You know what I mean?
Yeah. I mean, I think these questions are certainly fair. And I think perhaps part of it is brought on by the fact that, you know, this is a vampire story before the book actually tells you it is. So like the things happen with the boys and then you're immediately like, there's the vampire. And then the next chapter, it's like, no, there's the vampire. It's in the coffin. This is the arrival of the vampire's coffin, a very important moment in all these vampire stories. And so it leads to this confusion. But if he wasn't there, but was he there? But I think you're totally fair. It's totally fine. I appreciate the questions being asked. I'm not going to tell you anything, but I think it's fair what you're asking here, because these things occurred to me too as I was reading. Not that I didn't know the answers, but that I bet Matt's going to be wondering about this. Because when you were talking last week, when you were like, "Oh, this is the vampire. This is definitely the vampire," I was thinking to myself, "Oh, he's going to be confused when he turns the page and gets to the next chapter."
Yeah, but I think, I mean, here's like, you could say like, "Oh, King fucked up here because I'm confused," but I'm like, no, I think it's actually desirable for your readers to be in a state of sort of confused suspense.
Yeah.
In a story like this, like you can imagine, you are much like the characters in a state of, being huddled around the campfire, knowing that there's something dangerous out there in the darkness, but not knowing what it is or how many there are. That's way scarier than being like, yeah, there's definitely just one of these things, and this is its nature, and this is where it is.
Yeah.
It's better to not know those things at this point.
Man, so much of storytelling is just like controlled confusion.
Yeah. I like that. I like that statement a lot.
Yeah, it's great. But I love that this section, like this beginning section, is just kind of borderline creepy. Like you said, our characters are scared. They don't exactly know why. They start to figure out why. And it gets truly scary when they get to the Marston house itself. We spoke about fear, the fear of being a child last week. And now it was when I have to be honest that, like, sometimes in the course of this podcast, not always, but sometimes I like bring up things and try to steer conversations certain ways because I know what's coming the next week.
Uh-huh.
And that was one of them, where I knew we were going to have this rather direct comparison of childlike fear versus adult fear in this section. So I want to read this and I want to talk about it for a bit.
Okay.
The house seemed to lead towards them as if awaiting their arrival. Hank wheeled the truck up the driveway and around back. Neither of them looked too closely at what the bouncing headlights might reveal in the rank grass of the backyard. Hank felt a strain of fear enter his heart that he had not even felt in Nam, although he had been scared most of his time there. That was rational fear, fear that you might step on a pongee stick and see your foot swell up like some notorious green balloon, fear that some kid in black PJs whose name you couldn't even fit in your mouth might blow your head off with a Russian rifle, fear that you might draw a crazy Jake on patrol that might want you to blow up everyone in the village where the Kong had been a week before. But this fear was childlike, dreamy. There was no reference point to it. A house was a house, boards and hinges and nails and sills. There was no reason, really no reason, to feel that each splintered crack was exhaling its own chalky aroma of evil. That was just plain stupid thinking. Ghosts? He didn't believe in ghosts. Not after Nam. All right. So absolutely wonderful, right?
Yeah, indeed. In all this reading we've done in this whole project, this might be like the most direct juxtaposition between like mundane worldly evil and supernatural cosmic mega evil. Because like here we have like there's something terrifying in a way that is just outside of reason, and I think that's really interesting. Like, yeah, I don't know. What do you think? Yeah,
I mean, I think King lives in this world of the rational versus the irrational. I mean, we talked about that in Dark Tower so much that like the thing that brought down the magic of the world was rationality in some ways, was this kind of adult rational mundanity, that magic existed in this world, both on the side of good and obviously on the side of evil. And this is beyond any normal kind of fear. And I love that he calls the fear childlike, because it yes, ties into exactly what we were talking about, that this is something that adults don't feel very often, that we don't believe in ghosts. You grow up, you stop believing in, and some people do. Some people believe in ghosts. Some people believe in these things. I don't, but you stop believing in these things and you stop experiencing that fear where you're certain that there is a monster right around the corner, that there's something under your bed, that there's something out there. And these men suddenly have found themselves thrust in a situation where that fear that they probably haven't felt since they were children rushes up into them, and there's no reason for it. I love that. A house was a house, boards and hinges and nails and sills. And of course, the theme of these two chapters, if we had to say, is that the house is obviously clearly something beyond that. and it's really great.
Yeah. Well, and when the kids are caught in the woods, their fear is portrayed as being basically an almost supernatural, accurate, like sixth sense of the reality of this, supernatural evil. Like it's sort of implied, if not directly stated, like the only reason they even could sense that something was wrong is that they were children, and they were more sensitive to it. And these men who, have the coffin in the back of their truck, and they're sort of being, washed in this evil. The only thing they have to relate their sense of terror to is childlike fear, because that was the last time they felt this sort of thing.
Yeah.
So maybe I think King might even, be explicitly saying, like, when you're a child, you're attuned to this sort of irrational, but that doesn't mean it isn't real, sort of fear, sort of evil. And then when you grow up, you lose contact with that, but that doesn't mean that it wasn't real, at least in the context of the story.
Yeah, and I mean, we see with the children, when they felt this fear, like fled and ran. The two men, when they feel this fear, they shrug it off and try to keep doing their job. But it's like, maybe there's a reason you're feeling this fear. I mean, right. I think there's a lot of tension in the scene of, are these two guys going to get out of this thing alive? And we're not totally sure until the very end. Yeah,
absolutely. Yeah, absolutely.
I love the way, though, as they sit here ready to bring this box in, I love the way that King describes the box, like the house itself. He almost is giving the box character. Like, the box sat there, sawdust still clinging to it, squat and mute. Like, of course the box is squat and mute. It's a box, but like he's personified it in a way.
It sits.
Yeah.
Yeah. It isn't just, right. It's a verb. Yeah.
So, like we said, despite this fear, the men have a job to do, so they go and bring the sideboard into the creepy-ass basement. And I love this. They looked into each other's eyes and saw that fear had been changed to near terror by some secret alchemy.
That language feels like it's got to have some callbacks in it. It's sort of Lovecrafty. And I admit I haven't read the original Stoker's Dracula. Maybe I should for this project, actually. But I imagine that the phrase secret alchemy could very easily appear there.
Might be a fun bonus episode to like talk about Dracula. It's not that long of a book.
Yeah, I kind of want to read it because I feel like King is riffing on it in some ways, and it's like, well, okay, not knowing what he's riffing on, I feel like I'm definitely going to miss some things.
So, absolutely terrified, the two drop the box, sprint out of the basement and into safety. But they forgot to do something, Matt. They forgot to lock up all the entrances in the house, and that they were supposed to leave all the keys for those locks on the basement table. So Hank has to go back. He has to finish the job.
Oh, God. I love how when he loses the coin toss, it's like the worst thing in the world has happened.
Yeah.
Where, like, he's so like, oh God, this is just terrifying. It's so good.
And I mean, like you said, these are two grown-ass men, one of them a Vietnam War veteran, and they're just like terrified of walking into a basement and putting keys on a table.
Right. I mean, he seems certain that he's just going to die, and in fact, I think you're also certain that he's going to die.
Yeah, I mean that's what I love about this, is because like the tension is high. They get down in the basement, they drop the thing, they get out. There's that release of tension, and then they're like, "Oh no, we forgot to do a thing." And then you're like, "Yes, this is it. This is the moment now." Now this guy's gonna fucking die. And King does. We've talked many times about King's, like he'll kind of hint at what's gonna happen or just directly say it sometimes. And he does this a little bit here, where he has Royal. I think he has the character of Royal say like something like he would think about this again later. Like about this feeling later in his life, and like so he basically tells us that Royal's not gonna die. So when Hank loses the coin toss, you're like, oh, this fucking guy is so dead.
Yeah, I really did think that. I was like, okay, I guess we're getting to the part of the book where the vampire is just going to start picking people off. But no, not quite.
Not quite, no. He gets down into the basement and is looking around, and he sees a rat. A rat sat on the table, a huge one, and it did not move when the beam of light struck it. It sat up on its plump haunches and almost seemed to grin. I really love King uses this recurring beat of rats throughout this entire section, right? Royal and Hank kind of start out a little bit cocky about rats. They show up at the wharf and they're warned about the rats there, and Royal's like, I've never seen a rat that wouldn't run from one of these, Royal says, and he gestures to his boot. And so he's like totally confident, but then rats continue to show up. They think they hear them at the antique store. They come here and they hear them here, and they're totally freaked out by them. And then finally, for the first time, we get to see one, and it's sitting on the very table they need to put the keys on, just grinning at them. It's perfect. It's a perfect like carry forward of this recurring rat beat throughout this section.
Yeah, right. I love what the rat beat is doing. Because yet again, it's an example of like a thing where rationally you have no reason to be afraid of the rats, but King knows that this was sort of inexplicably creepy. I'm not personally scared of rats. If I saw a rat in my garage, I would be like, ah, shit, I got rats, but I wouldn't be like afraid. But I can imagine that if my garage rat like didn't seem frightened of me, but instead just like stared at me and maybe seemed to be grinning, then I would actually feel a little bit unnerved, because it's like, okay, things have gone from this was an understandable situation that I just need to deal with, to like beyond the bounds of rationality and reason, to like, what the hell is going on here, you know? And now I've got a little intruder who's creeping me out.
He kind of uses rats to track the fear through mundane rational fear to otherworldly fear, because this rat is seemingly not acting like a normal rat would. Right. I mean, it's very possible that this could just be a rat that just happened to be hanging out on this table and just looks at him because there's a light shining towards it. But man, it doesn't feel like it's behaving like a rat should.
Right. Exactly.
And it just increases the tension. And of course, the great culminating moment here is Hank sees what could be blue jeans and a t-shirt, and then he hears a loud snap and he takes off running. And as he runs by it, he sees that one of the bands on the coffin sideboard has snapped off. Yeah.
Yep. And they were like metal bands too, right?
Yeah, it was metal. It was metal that just snapped on its own. It's the temperature change. Just went from like, it's just really cool down there, it's fine.
Right. Totally natural. Yeah. I love how, he takes he goes in, he gets his money, and then tells him about the blue jeans and the t-shirt that he saw. And then of course, real estate man,
Crockett,
good
old Davy,
goes from kind of a sleazy and despicable guy to helping cover up the murder of the boy, but probably knowingly.
Yeah. I mean, Hank basically says, this looks exactly like what I know the little boy was wearing the day he was kidnapped. Right. So yeah, we're basically told the corpse of Ralphie Glick is in the basement of the Marston house, which is not surprising to any of us, but
right. And now Crockett knows like what he is now completely, I think it's fair to say like he realizes what kind of shit he's in now. And then, and now he's just like, okay, all right. How The amazing thing to me is that, from the very beginning, Straker was seen as a guy that is like utmost in his confidence that he will get away with all of this, right? That like he's going to come into town, he's going to buy off the real estate guy and know that the guy isn't going to say shit. He's like, he says, oh, the people are going to talk. And he's like, I don't give a shit about the people. Like these are men that come into town and they just know that none of the shit's going to matter, because they know that at a place like Salem's Lot, they can just post up in the evilness and get away with it. Yeah. They've just done it before. Right. And it makes it all the more terrifying. Yep. So we next move over to Milt Crossan's agriculture store, where Mr. Straker shows up and collects some food items. I love this scene, Matt. I love what King is doing with the scene. Like, he's doing a couple things, right? He's introducing us to Straker in a way that makes him seem not entirely human. Like, we see him lift a 30-pound box and everyone notices that it seems to weigh absolutely nothing. And then he pays with a very, very old 20, which I think it is a fun little beat. If you maybe didn't know that it was a vampire story. Right. Yeah. Yeah. So I guess this is one of those things that kind of supports the idea that maybe Straker is not precisely a familiar, like I was saying last last week, but rather like a lower tier vampire, because Callahan does have his little taxonomy of different types of vampire.
I'm wondering how much of that you remember.
Not much. I'm sort of glad that I don't remember too much. Like, I know, like, it seemed like some of the vampires were just really crummy.
Mm-hmm.
Like the ones that Callahan was hunting did not seem as kind of with it as Straker does, assuming Straker is some kind of vampire.
Mm-hmm.
And then I think that Barlow is supposed to be like the head vampire. I maybe not, literally the head vampire, but like some kind of high ranking vampire. I don't know what to like make of all of this, but like right now, I guess I would assume that Barlow is like way more powerful and more vampiric, because I mean, we see Straker walking around in daylight, and
Sure.
The first time we see him is, as you pointed out, literally noon. And so whatever's going on with him, it's kind of outside of the ordinary of what we would expect. But yeah, I don't know. I mean, maybe I'm just wrong. Maybe he's something else. But doesn't he just buy like basically a whole bunch of meat?
Yes. He does buy some dry goods as well, but he buys a ton of meat. Like,
right.
It's seemingly more than like one person or two people would need.
Exactly.
Yeah.
Yeah. Two normal people. Right.
Yeah. Yeah. I mean, that's fun. Maybe one day we'll circle back around and we can do a refresher on the Father Callahan's types of vampires. But
yeah, maybe so. I almost wonder if I want to. Okay, sure. Yeah,
I don't think we should do it until the end of the book.
Okay,
like, I don't think that. I think though, like, I don't think King had clarified those quite as clearly while he was writing this book.
Sure.
We'll see what kind of vampire Barlow is when we see him. But yeah, we don't need to bring that. I appreciate that some of this information has just fallen out of your head because it makes this a little more fun. But
yeah, I mean, I'm definitely not sitting here trying to remember either, because I'm like, I don't really want that to be my context. Actually, like I want to be in a state where it's mysterious and creepy.
Sure. But outside of what we learn about Straker in this section, I love how King writes it. Like, this is the general store. There's a bunch of people in it. And then like everyone in the store is looking at Straker and then like immediately starts gossiping about it afterwards. Like, the dialogue here is so good. The back and forth of the arguing, the interrupting. Like, I love this beat, this recurring beat about whether Straker's car was a 39 or a 40. It's one of those, it doesn't matter. It doesn't matter. But like this recurring stupid arguments that just keep going.
Yeah, right. It's yet another beat of this idea that the town never changes. I love the line. I don't know if I have the exact quote, but it's something like, the argument went on being carried out more in the silences than in the, yeah. It was, and you can totally imagine that, you can imagine being in that room.
Yeah. Yeah. It's great. We next cut over to Ben Mears again, sitting in his room writing, when he is interrupted by good old Constable Gillespie, who has a few questions for Ben. But first, he does this. Can I do something for you? Well, my wife reads this. He held up the book. She heard you was in town, but she's shy. She kind of thought maybe you'd write your name in it or something. Ben took the book. The way Weasel Craig tells it, your wife's been dead 14 or 15 years. That's so. Parkins looked totally unsurprised. That Weasel... he does love to talk. He'll open his mouth too wide one day and fall right in. Ben said nothing.
Oh, God, I love this scene. I really did. The longer this segment goes on, like, the cannier you realize Gillespie is, actually. Mm-hmm. He rapidly becomes, higher and higher in your estimation as a person.
Yeah. I mean, it's really interesting because like he was kind of introduced alongside his like bumbling deputy, right? And so you make a lot of small town assumptions about him. And no, he's clever here. Like it's not that he's like Ben's just a clever guy too. And like this opening of the scene really sets the stage for what is going to be two people like matching wits against each other in certain ways.
Yeah. I mean, and you set them as antagonists, even though I have a strong suspicion that they're going to end up being allies. But King's going to make them work for it, because there's a natural suspicion against Ben because of hey, he came into town at the same time as these other two guys. So
yeah.
Yeah.
I do think it's really interesting how immediately defensive Ben gets when he's questioned, right? Like he kind of just has very logical questions for him. Like, where were you the night this kid went missing? You're new to town. And Ben is like immediately angry about it. He says, I'm just tired of being the stranger in town, getting pointed out in the streets, being nudged over in the library. Now you come around with this Yankee Trader routine, trying to find out if I've got Ralphie Glick's scalp in my closet. This is really worth talking about because I think it goes back to why Ben is here and what he wants here. He looks at Salem's Lot as his home in a way. Like this is to him a nostalgic return to childhood, a return to his childhood home where everything made sense, where the world made sense. But nobody is treating him that way, and it's really frustrating him. Nobody's treating him as if he belongs, with the exception of maybe Susan, right? He is treated as much of an outsider as Straker and Barlow are, and it's frustrating him. And I think King makes this clear because he'll use Parkins to later on like directly make that point for us that Straker and Barlow and Ben are all the same in his mind.
Yeah, right. And it's funny because this is not an angle I really saw coming before this point, that the idea that like Ben would be a suspect when the vampire starts snatching people. But it totally makes sense. And you know, I think this makes sense as a kind of a source of dramatic tension in the story, that, you know, more and more people might come to suspect Ben. In fact, you could even imagine a plot point where the vampires maybe frame him somehow, since he's such a convenient subject. But yeah, I mean, I also like what you were saying about the fact that he's frustrated that like no one is allowing him to just bathe in the nostalgia and the comfort of the town.
Yeah.
And it's like, well, that's not what this is. Like, that's not ever going to happen, basically, is what they're telling him.
Yep.
Yeah.
He's also, we'll see, like intensely protective of his novel. Like he describes it as his child, and that like, I think the constable tries to read a little bit and he gets mad about that too. I think we'll circle back around to his intense protection of his novel when we get to his explanation to Susan of what it is. But I really loved this line. Mark Twain said a novel was confession to everything by a man who had never done anything.
That's great. Yeah, it works perfectly. You have to assume that's true.
Yeah.
Yeah, I mean, I suspect a key reason to place this moment where he reacts negatively to the constable wanting to read the book is to contrast that with how easy he finds it to tell Susan about the book later on.
Sure, yeah, it shows his ease with her and his comfort with her. Exactly. Yeah, I guess this is the point where I kind of want to pick my one bone I have with at least this early part of this book. The thing about Ben Mears is he's just Stephen King. Like he's just Stephen King. And like, I like people joke about how Stephen King writes about writers a lot, and that's true. But like his characterization of Ben is just him, right? Like the way he writes, the way he structures his day, his problems with alcohol.
He's extremely tall.
Yeah. This quote, like the Mark Twain quote about confession, is after we talked about last week about, we kind of joked about how King probably wanted to punch his son a little bit. We got an email from a listener who talked about that King actually talked about this. He talked about how I think it was with The Shining, not with this book, but about how like a lot of writing is confession, of confessing the things that went on in your head at times, where he's never harmed any of his kids, but man, that doesn't mean he didn't want to at certain points. And he puts that into his characters and confesses it in a way. So when I read this part with that in mind, I was just like, oh, this is just Stephen King. Like, this is what Stephen King would say. Like Mark Twain said a novel was confession. Like, and I guess he's a young man and he makes a character that's a writer. And so it's just him. I don't think this is a problem that King will carry forward, but Ben is just Stephen King, except his wife died in a motorcycle accident.
Yeah. I mean, I guess it's kind of funny because the book is full of, you know, a dozen other characters who are the furthest thing from Stephen King. He just happens to also have the protagonist be this sort of character. It is funny. I would love to find out like why he chooses to do it this way, because you feel like he could have made a half dozen other characters who we've met so far, the protagonist, instead of Ben.
Mm-hmm.
And maybe it's just that it's like, maybe he would just answer like, look, like I'm a writer. I think I'm thinking about the story in this way. And so it's kind of the most natural for me to kind of dive into the story along the vector that I am thinking about it, which is the writer character. That's all fine. It's interesting. I'm trying to think of myself. Like whenever I write a story, like it's always about something that I'm sort of trying to puzzle through or figure out. The character is never just like Matt Freeman, but the character is often like some facet of me or the part of me that is having trouble with the thing, sort of caricatured.
Certainly, yeah.
But what's funny is like they're never like an engineer who has 3 children. Like it's always some spin on it, right? So yeah, I don't know. It is interesting though. I'm not annoyed by it, but you're definitely right that Ben Mears is a young Stephen King.
I'm not annoyed by it either, and I like you said, I think the reason he gets away with it is the wrong phrase here, but I'll say it. The reason he gets away with it is because he just spent an entire chapter characterizing like 40 other characters. So like even if it was true that Ben Mears is the weakest character in the book, and I'm not declaring that here, I think we got a lot of book to go. But even if that was true, the book is stuffed with so many amazing characters that it just doesn't matter.
Right.
It's just really funny to me that like this has always kind of occurred to me that like out of any of King's books, I think Ben is the closest to just being Stephen.
Right. It's sort of like how George R. R. Martin has been like Samuel Tarly is his character insert, which is funny because it's like the least admirable character in some ways, but very admirable in others.
It's such an author thing too.
Exactly.
Like, just gonna rip themselves apart.
Exactly. Yeah. That's why they write.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
So we next follow Parkins as he heads over to the new antique store and meets Mr. R.T. Straker. One thing worth noting is in this interaction is the way that King is intentionally echoing the previous one, right? These come right after another. We see Parkins' interaction with Ben and then Parkins' interaction with Straker. And we see here that like Ben has to stop his writing, mark his place, and get up before he answers the door. Straker is just like there right away. Like the door opens like creepily fast. Ben says he apologizes for not having coffee to offer him, but Straker does have coffee. Like I think King is marrying these beats in certain ways to like make you feel the similarity of these two interactions. Like both of them are annoyed about being asked questions, but Ben Mears' annoyance is much more like directly combative. Straker himself is much more coolly indifferent, much more masked. They of course both talk about the missing Glick boy, but I think Parkins is so much more direct with Ben than he is with Straker.
Right. And it's evident that Straker has prepared. He's totally unsurprised to be questioned about it. He seems to just have the plausible answers ready in a very casual way. Just like we kind of already know, like he knew that the sheriff was going to show up at his door before he even committed the murder, assuming it's him. I still don't know, but yeah, because like they've done this before, right? He's probably seen a dozen sheriffs in exactly this context before.
Yeah. And I love this bit here at the end of their conversation. That's good, Parkins said. He opened the door and looked resignedly out at the pouring rain. You tell Mr. Barlow that I'm looking forward. I certainly will, Constable Gillespie. Ciao. Parkins looked back, startled. Ciao? Straker's smile widened. Goodbye, Constable Gillespie. That's the familiar Italian expression for goodbye. Oh? Well, you learn something new every day, don't you? Bye. He stepped out into the rain and closed the door behind him. Not familiar to me, it ain't. Just a wonderful play on words with the double meaning of familiar, right? Like,
yeah, the double meaning of familiar and the double meaning of chow, obviously. It's so good that the vampire is calling the human chow.
Yes.
As in food. But bye food.
I guess it's like a triple meaning of familiar, right? Because like the familiar Italian expression does not mean you should be familiar with this. It means if I'm familiar with you, this is the expression I use.
Exactly. Yeah. He means, chow is a word for goodbye between people who are familiar. And Gillespie means, no, I'm not familiar with that word. I mean, it's very funny to see like fictional characters like, either have a misunderstanding of a word, or else Gillespie is making his own pun privately to himself with the door closed.
That would be fun. Yeah. I mean, it is interesting because once again, playing the two conversations off each other, in the Ben Mears conversation, Parkins comes off intelligent, like resourceful. He's kind of finding his way into the questions in a political, smart way with Ben. Here, it's like Straker is going out of his way to make him look stupid, or trying to. And I think the way like Parkins responds, like he talks in contractions much more in the Straker conversation that he does with Ben, right? He talks in much more complete sentences when he's talking with Ben. And here, like, you tell Mr. Barlow, I'm looking forward. Like he's cutting it off there, right?
Yeah.
It's just really interesting. And the way he says bye, it's not BYE, it's just bye.
Yeah.
Like he's like playing up his accent almost, it seems like.
He's acting like more of a bumbling hick, maybe to put Straker off his guard, possibly. Or
trying to, and it might not necessarily be working.
It doesn't seem that it is working, because if anything, Straker does come off as a little bit arrogant here, like a little bit like he's so confident that like number one, confident that Gillespie doesn't have anything on him, and number two, confident that even if he did, it wouldn't matter.
Yeah.
And like that's the kind of that's what I mean when I say arrogance.
Yeah. I mean, and of course, this is done after the fact that we know that he either did or is related to the doing of the murder, because it's his house where the boys' clothes are in. So
yeah,
I mean, there's no doubt here. The King doesn't want us to have any doubt about this man's responsibility with this thing. It's him. It's him.
Right.
So
yeah. Yep.
Now King kind of steps back here at the end of the chapter and just decides to fucking show off for a bit. I'm going to read this whole section because it's beautiful. The telephone wires make an odd humming on clear, cool days, almost as if vibrating with the gossip that is transmitted through them. And it's a sound like no other, the lonely sound of voices flying over space. The telephone poles are gray and splintery, and the freezes and thaws of winter have heavied them into leaning postures that are casual. They are not businesslike and military, like phone poles anchored into concrete. Their bases are black with tar if they are beside paved roads, and floured with dust if besides the back roads. Old weathered cleat marks shown on their surfaces where linemen have climbed to fix something in 46 or 52 or 69. Birds, crows, sparrows, robins, starlings roost on the humming wires and sit in hunched silence. And perhaps they hear the foreign human sounds through their taloned feet. If so, their beady eyes give no sign. The town has a sense, not of history, but of time, and the telephone poles seem to know this. If you lay your hand against one, you can feel the vibration from the wires deep in the wood, as if souls had been imprisoned in there and were struggling to get out. Just fuck you, man. Like that's I'm furious at how fucking good that is. Like the thing that is remarkable to me about Stephen King is that he's a pop culture writer, right? Like he's broadly appealing. And so he writes in a way that is broadly appealing. But like he also can write incredible flowery prose too.
Yeah.
He can go back and forth between like that paragraph, which is just, it's fucking art.
Yeah.
And then a funny conversation where like pitch perfect dialogue where men argue about what year the monster car is. Like, you know, like it I don't even know how to describe it, but it's just amazing that he can flit back and forth between these two things, and they both feel natural. They both feel good. He just kind of turns the page and says, all right, here we go. I'm going to give this beautiful sermon of telephone poles and wires and what they represent and what they mean.
Right.
And this isn't even the whole section, right? It goes on to like, he just has short little slips of the dialogue channeling through the wires.
I mean, yeah, you could do a lengthy essay about just this paragraph. I mean, I can just the things that occur to me just as I'm looking at it. You have the idea of the gossip flowing through the town being a relevant part of its character. You have the idea of time and age and the fact that the town never really changes. It just sort of exists in this present, in this sort of eternal present. which is emphasized many times, emphasized in the way that like freezes and thaws of winters have just sort of made these phone lines settle, but not really fundamentally change them. You have the cleat marks that span decades of time. You have, I love the idea of the birds, and this is something that we pointed out about King before, where he takes every opportunity to give you a visual. So really what he wants to do with this paragraph is talk to you about the idea of the town being in stasis, and the idea of like the souls being imprisoned in the wires. But he gives you two separate clear visuals. He gives you the idea of splintery gray telephone poles leaning with their bottoms either spattered with asphalt or dust. And then he gives you the visual of birds, crows, sparrows, robins, starlings, roosting on the humming wires, sitting in hunched silence. All of these are visual words, right? You're getting a picture. He's putting a picture in your mind, right? And this is the kind of thing that he does over and over that I think is really what I've come to think of as being characteristic of King, that like while you're reading King, you're visualizing the things all the time. He's never not painting a visual picture in your mind, even if what he's really doing here he doesn't care if there's nothing visual he needs to say. What he's saying is on the level of metaphor, but he's still using the visual to connect with you. It's just, I just love it.
Sure. Yeah. And I think getting away from the beautifulness of the language and the theming here, the thing that people are gossiping about are Straker and Ben, right? Like that's what they're talking about. They're talking about the new people in town. And again, the book is kind of going out of its way to take these new entries into the town and compare them directly against each other. We have what we know is an evil force, and then we have Ben Mears, and they're both being treated by the town as the new people. And it's really interesting. Yeah,
it is.
And then, of course, at the end of this section, Danny Glick dies.
What a way to end it.
Yeah, we get a test sheet. I wonder how the audiobook did on that. It's like it's in the book itself, it's like a framed piece of paper, like with a box around it, in different fonts. That is the tests that were done and the results and the diagnostic. And then pending further tests, let's release him.
Yeah, I just kind of read that. So
and then he dies.
Yep. And then he dies, and he's dead now.
Danny Glick, dead. Never going to see him again.
Never going to see him again.
All right, let's move on to chapter 5, Ben 2. And we begin our second chapter of the week with, of course, our protagonist, Ben. And I think, like, before we begin this one, I do think this is probably, of the 5 chapters we've covered, the most important one we've had as far as theming outside of, like, our initial setup chapter of chapter 1. I think there's a lot going on in this chapter as far as King telling us what he's trying to do with this story.
Yeah, I think that's fair. It really does feel like we've picked right back up where we left off with Ben, even though some time has passed, actually. And I think the reason it feels that way, as you say, is because there is such a thematic integrity. There's such a steady through line since the last time we really spent time with him. Yeah.
So Ben here is back at the Nortons having dinner again, and his relationship with 2/3 of them continues to improve. I like this paragraph here. There had been no change in Ben's relationship with the Nortons. Susan's liking for him was frank and clear and natural, and he liked her very much. In Bill, he sensed a steadily increased liking, held in abeyance by the subconscious taboo that affects all fathers when in the presence of men who are there because of their daughters rather than themselves. If you like another man and you are honest, you speak freely, discuss women over beer, shoot the shit about politics. But no matter how deep the potential liking, it is impossible to open up completely to a man who is dangling your daughter's potential defloration between his legs. Ben reflected that after marriage, the possible had become the actual, and could you be complete friends with the man who was banging your daughter night after night? There might be a moral there, but Ben doubted it.
King has obviously put a lot of thought into this, and seemingly concluded that there probably is no moral there.
Yeah, because this is just King. Once again, this is just King musing about this stuff, and he puts it into Ben.
Just musing probably about his relationship with his own father-in-law, for being honest.
Yeah. It's great. I love the detail of there had been no change in Ben's relationship with the Nortons, though, which is not entirely true. I mean, obviously, it's increasing. Susan is into him in a big way.
And the mom just still kind of dislikes him. Although, I mean, like you said, she seems to very much dislike him, actually. Like, I think before it seemed like there was like a chill there. And we kind of end this section with her being like, get the hell away from my daughter, except in her own mind. She doesn't say this to him.
Yeah. And to go with this, the weather has kind of matched Ann Norton's icy mood, right? Where it's getting colder. It's the summer is going away. The heat is going away. It's getting colder, which means the dark is coming, which means it's just things aren't good, Ben. And he's just kind of like, there's been no change in my relationship with the Nortons.
Yeah. Darkness is upon the land, but we're fine.
I do think like Ann Norton obviously continues to strongly dislike Ben. But Mr. Mears over here doesn't seem to be doing a lot to help with that. I love this part right here. I'll just get a jacket, Susan murmured to Ben and turned up the back walk. She was wearing a red play skirt thigh high, and she exposed a lot of leg going up the steps to the door. Ben watched, knowing Anne was watching him watch. He's kind of like throwing out the gauntlet here.
Oh, absolutely. Yeah.
And then, of course, to make that even more textual, we get this interaction here. How long do you intend to stay in the lot, Ben? Anne asked, showing polite interest. Until the book gets written, anyway, he said. After that, I can't say. It's very lovely in the mornings, and the air tastes good when you breathe it. He smiled into her eyes. I may stay longer. She smiled back. It gets cold in the winters, Ben. Awfully cold.
Oh, God. They're both completely trolling each other. I really love this. This might be my favorite short segment out of the whole week's reading, because it's it's so good, because King, he doesn't need to lay out the subtext plainly. It's perfectly clear. Awfully cold. God, fuck off, Ben. Get lost. Leave my daughter alone, right? God, so good.
It's just, it's so great. I just want to wonder why Ben is doing this. Like
he's an asshole.
He's basically decided, I've got the dad and I've got her. I don't need the mom to like me. So instead of trying, I'm just going to actually stoke her hatred of me.
I just think he's just the kind of person who is not going to, if somebody doesn't like him, he's not going to like try to win them over in a supplicative way. He's just going to be like, okay, well, fuck you then. Your daughter likes me anyway.
Yeah. I think you're right. And that gets into something I want to talk about here, because Ben and Susan say they're going down to Spencer's for a drink, but that was all just a ruse to Susan's parents. And that's ridiculous, right? These are both adults. Like, he's in his late 20s, she's in her early 20s, but they're sneaking out in the middle of the night to be alone together. It's so high school. And it's so fascinating to me. Like, Ben has returned home to recapture the nostalgia of his younger years, and he's kind of behaving that way. He's kind of in many ways behaving like a child, like a teenager.
You're exactly right. Yeah, they're both literally acting like teenagers. That they even directly do the thing that Susan says teenagers come to the park to do.
Right. It's so interesting. Like, I think he loves part of that, though. Like, right? Like, this is him. He's a man who feels like when he left Salem's Lot, he left his childhood behind. He didn't, in his mind, get the experience that he wants. Like, I think he has built up in his head, like, what it would have been to be a child, to be a teenager, to have grown into adulthood living in this town. Yeah. And he didn't get that. And he sees this young woman who, as we said earlier, he thought was 7 years younger than she actually was. And he sees an opportunity to get that stuff. And look, I'm being a little unfair to Ben here. I think he legitimately likes Susan. Like, I don't want to say that. I think he legitimately likes her. But there's also all this other stuff mixed in it.
There's a ton of other stuff, right? There's, like you said, the fact that this is part of the whole mosaic of things that he wants to get out of his nostalgic return. There's also the fact that, like, it's incredibly flattering to have this young woman who like literally was already kind of in love with him before she met him.
Yeah.
Where it's like, oh, like, what? wow, I don't even have to try. She already likes me just for the book that she already read. So there's a lot that's again, I don't want to be like Ben sucks because of all of the above. It's more like there's a lot of complicating factors.
Yeah, definitely. I really like this part. They walked around the war memorial with its long list of names, the oldest from the Revolutionary War, the newest from Vietnam, carved under the War of 1812. There were 6 hometown names for the most recent conflict, the new cuts in the brass gleaming like fresh wounds. He thought, this town has the wrong name. It ought to be Time. And as if the action was a natural outgrowth of the thought, he looked over his shoulder for the Marston House, but the bulk of the municipal building blocked it out. It's so good, man. Like, the King is steering us directly into our themes here, and that's basically the rest of the chapter is our characters directly discussing the themes of the book,
right?
So it's like we're prepping for it,
right? Yeah, connecting just to make it explicit with the previous bit where the text says the town had a sense not of history but of time.
Yeah.
That's great. I also think it's kind of neat how, maybe I'm reading too much into this, but that's okay. He's looking at a war memorial, which is a record of death.
Mm-hmm.
He turns around to look for the Marston House and can't find it. But that's because he already has basically a totem of darkness and evil sitting right in front of him, which is what the war memorial is.
Oh, I like that.
So the Marston House doesn't need to be here.
I like that. Yeah, it's one of the few times in the book that he's looked for it and not been able to find it. Like,
exactly.
It's said over and over again that you can just see this thing and it's always there, like lurking over your shoulder. But this is the one time it isn't.
It kind of feels meaningful that when you can't see it, it's like, well, it's not like you're in a place that's already like the saddest place in the town. So,
So the two get into the park and lay down on the grass, and then this happens. Ben, yes, make love to me. Do you want to? Yes, he said. I want that. Here on the grass, she said. Yes. She was looking up at him, her eyes wide in the dark. She said, make it be good. I'll try. And then she says, if you love me, then love me.
Oh, okay.
All joking aside, like I couldn't help, especially with the theme of our whole show, but compare Susan and Ben's first consummation of their relationship to Roland and Susan's in Wizard and Glass, right? Mm-hmm. Both are sneaking away from nosy eyes in secret, both making love under the stars. There's something really similar here in this whole thing.
Yeah. It's funny. I didn't notice until now, but you made the comparison to the red inflamed sunset. And of course,
don't you start with me.
Red is our color of romantic love. Mm-hmm. There's no pink yet, and I don't think there will be, honestly. But
I would be freaked out if suddenly there's like very clear pink imagery.
Yeah, but I don't think I'm too far off in the red, though. I don't. I think that maybe this is just a symbol that King has always kind of had in his head. Mm-hmm. Yeah, I mean, so it's less explicit. The sex scene that is less explicit. It's more of a fade to black sort of thing.
Sure.
And it's treated very differently than Roland and Susan's love, because I mean, I think, Ben and Susan are both flawed human beings and their relationship may be doomed. But it's not for the same reason as Roland and Susan. Like, it's not because they're young and dumb and this is the first time they've ever been hot for somebody and thus they're idiots. It's sure. Like they both kind of got their own things going on. Not that Roland and Susan didn't, but here I think it's more complicated and more kind of adult.
Yeah, I mean, I think you're right. Like, Wizard and Glass emphasizes the youth of those two characters, and also the story had said about 17,000 times before we got to that moment that this is a doomed relationship. That these star-crossed lovers,
right?
It's not going to happen. So it is different, but I mean. I just wonder, like, with the name similarity, like, I wonder if King was in any way channeling Salem's Lot or channeling the same feelings when he wrote that scene much later in his career. I don't know. Yeah,
I mean, it is interesting that he chose to use the name Susan, right? Because like, it is. I'm weirdly mentioning George R. R. Martin a lot of times. This.
It's your new
recently
Lord of the Rings.
It's my new Lord of the Rings, I guess. But yeah, no, it's interesting because apparently he uses the name Lyanna or some variation of Lyanna in like way too many of his books. Rob. That's another name that he uses repeatedly. So like, it's just interesting that writers kind of fall in love with a name that they use over and over. And so like, I do kind of wonder, not only is Susan used repeatedly, but he even within the Dark Tower itself, he's like, so how come there are two characters basically named Susan in this book? Yeah, it's just interesting. I don't know if it's going to take us anywhere.
Yeah, I don't know. It's just fun to think about. I think we can draw the comparisons whether they were meant to be there or not.
Yeah,
that's what's fun about this. But
yeah.
So the deed done, Ben is walking Susan home when he finally starts telling her about what his book about, which is, well, Matt, it's just King's way of telling us what his book about is actually. We get this part here. Do you know The Haunting of Hill House by Shirley Jackson? Yes, he quoted softly, and whatever walked there walked alone. You asked me what my book was about. Essentially, it's about the recurrent power of evil. And so basically he gives us a history lesson. We learn that Hubie Marston was not just an innocent trucker. He was a hitman for the mob, an evil man who did evil things and then built a monument to his evil. And now it's occupied again. And there's been another disappearance.
Oh, man. So, yeah, it is really fun and a good twist to learn that Hubie Marston was himself a sort of Stephen King monster.
Yeah.
I wasn't expecting that. That was fun.
Unconfirmed, but children would disappear around Hubie Marston as well. It's just, there's, this is kind of, I think this gets to the crux of Ben Mears and his problems right now. Like, he expected to come back to Salem's Lot and embrace the nostalgia of the unchanged. He wanted to, he had this horrible tragedy that happened in his life and it fucked him up, and he ran away from it and ran back to Salem's Lot to embrace the nostalgia of the unchanged. But also, that's not the only thing he wanted to do here. He also wanted to confront the ghosts of his past. Because while he has nostalgic memories for this place, he also has memories that scare the shit out of him. He has the moment he went inside the house. And so he wanted to have his cake and eat it too, right? He wanted to come to a place that hasn't changed and love the nostalgia of the not changing. But also he had this image in his mind of him coming to a place that he used to be afraid of, and now he's changed so he can defeat the evil, right? But the thing is, nothing changes here. Nothing. And that means that whatever evil was up in that house when he was a child is still there. And the implication here is that evil has reached out to another evil man to do more evil things. And of course, the fun is we don't know they're vampires yet, but that makes the timelessness of the theming work even more.
Yeah, that's really great framing. I love how you put that. I mean, in a place that is defined by its almost supernatural stagnation and refusal to grow and change, it will be impossible to make things better. The evil that lives in the Marston house is part of the town, which itself doesn't change. Yeah. And when Hubie Marston dies, the evil just waits. It doesn't leave, can't leave because nothing can change. You kind of ask yourself if killing the vampire would even make it leave, or maybe if it wasn't there before Hubie Marston too. I love it. Yeah.
I mean, and it's so great because like Ben is just in love with. I just remember when he's infatuated with the idea that, oh my God, that barn is still there. It still looks the same. It's the same road. It's the same this. He's just in love with that idea. And what the book is kind of starting to hint towards us is actually nothing ever changing might not be a good thing.
Yeah.
Because if there's bad here, that's not going to change either.
Yeah, exactly. Yep. Love it.
So Ben and Susan depart, but not before she tells him that she loves him. And he seems absolutely shocked by this. And this is when I just ask you directly, Matt, what do you think of their relationship at this point? Like, we had this moment of great importance where they first met, right? Like it was almost Ka, right? This is almost the forming of a quartet when these two people first meet each other. And yes, it does seem like Ben does like her. But obviously, in my opinion, she's way more into him than he is into her. Like, maybe that's just me, but like she just dropped. How long has it been? Like a week? And she's telling him she loves him. And there was a scene earlier, we kind of glossed over it, but when she was cooking for him in Eva's boarding house, she wanted to tell him right there that she
Right.
loved him.
Yeah, I don't actually know how long it's been, but it feels like about a week. Yeah, I mean, so my take is like, this is a dude who has still not even remotely processed his wife's death, nor, as far as I can tell or remember, even mentioned to Susan that he's a widower.
I'm not 100% sure about that.
I like if he did, it was like offhand and not referenced.
Mhm.
I mean, but anyway, like, yeah, you're right. He's totally wrapped up on his epic journey to conquer his past and stuff. And Susan's like a nice bonus that he gets to have, but he's not spending a lot of time thinking about her. He's just he's totally fixated on his novel and his quest. I mean, I feel like if he was, Roland with Susan level besotted, then it would be interfering with writing the book. But he's like, nothing is interfering with writing that fucking book. And in contrast, he's like the main thing going on in her life right now. So
totally. And then, I mean, we get this, like, it's so interesting because to make the Wizard and Glass comparison again, in that novel, Susan's aunt was set up very directly to be an antagonist to this relationship. But she was also an awful person, right? Like, she was just over and over again, King hits the beat of how shitty Susan's aunt was. Susan's mother in this story does not like Ben, but like, we haven't seen anything specific about why she's a bad person or like why we should like shrug off her deep concern about what this boy means for the future of her daughter.
I mean, as far as we can tell, she's actually right. Like we like Ben, but we also kind of get that he's got some problems, and he's kind of trying to deal with them, but he doesn't need to be in a relationship right now. Let me put it that way. Certainly not with somebody like Susan.
Yeah, I know he's kind of in his barbs with her, like said, oh yeah, like once the book's done, maybe I'll stick around. But is he is it really in his plans that he's just going to live in Salem's Lot now? Like, I just don't buy it. I think this is part of a project. He's now writing about the house itself, and he's going to finish the book and he's going to take off.
I mean, Susan's clearly imagining her wedding dress right now. and Ben probably may literally have not even occurred to him the idea of marriage and settling down. And
yeah, I mean, we're in his head and we certainly don't see any of that. I mean, the only reaction we get to her dropping the L-bomb is he gets home and then is like too excited to sleep or write. So he goes out drinking. But like, excited is such a loaded word, because you could say like he's excited because he's like, oh, this girl said she loves me, and I'm like super jazzed about it.
Right.
Like, I remember the first time I've been told that someone loves me. It is very exciting. Like your adrenaline gets pumping. It's fun. It feels great. Yeah. But also, like, excited could just, in this term, just be like restless and like he runs to alcohol in this case.
He's just got too much on his mind, I guess, is what I would say. Like he may legitimately have all of the feelings that you would sort of expect. Like, I mean, his reaction reminds me of a sort of teenage reaction, where he's, he's like, I think excited is a good word for it. But it's a good point that he does react to his excitement by being like, oh, I need to get drunk to fix this.
So he heads on to the local watering hole and bumps into the town drunk Weasel and helps him with his alcohol problem. I don't know. I love this paragraph right here. Jackie brought the pitcher on the tray littered with beer-soaked change and lifted it onto the table, her right arm bulging like a prizefighter's. She looked at the dollar as if it were a new species of cockroach. That's $1.40, she said. Ben put another bill down. I don't know why, like, she looked at the dollar as if it was a new species of cockroach. I just love the specificity of this whole exchange. It's just wonderful.
Once again, painting a very clear visual picture for you. Visual imagery. I mean, I also just love the whole description of the bar, because I mean, I've enjoyed my time in a few crappy bars in my day, and King just nails every single facet of the crappy bar experience. Like the trays covered in beer and just everything constantly kind of wet with sticky drying beer is the feeling that I got.
You can smell it. You can smell it.
You can smell it. You can smell the sweetness. You can feel the rough texture of the tabletop, can't you?
Mm-hmm. Yep.
Yeah.
We see also here, Matt, our friendly English teacher, Matt Burke, is here, and he and Ben get to have a chat. And I love this entire scene, Matt. The conversation between these two is just absolutely delightful. You guessed last week that perhaps Matt would be part of Ben Mears' quartet, and this seems to indicate things are at least somewhat heading in that direction. Yeah,
now that you said that, he's going to die immediately. I mean, seriously, though, this bit makes him even more likable.
Absolutely. So Matt and Ben's conversation eventually turns to Ben's book. He asks the same question everyone else has been asking him. What is he writing about? And we kind of get a redo of the conversation Ben had with Susan here, but with an individual who's a bit older and understands. I say a bit older. Matt is much older than Susan.
Mm-hmm.
And I think Matt understands what Ben is saying on a level way beyond Susan's. He gets this town.
He gets it. He's like already there. He's like, I know exactly what you're talking about.
Yeah. So Ben says, it stands on the hill overlooking the village. Oh, like some kind of dark idol. He chuckled to make the remark seem trivial. It seemed to him that he had to said something so deeply felt in an unguarded way that he must have opened a window on his soul to the stranger. Matt Burke's sudden close scrutiny of him did not make him feel any better. That is talent, he said. Pardon me? You have said it precisely. The Marston house has looked down on us all for almost 50 years, at all our little picadillos and sins and lies, like an idol. Maybe it's seen the good, too, Ben said. There's little good in sedentary small towns, mostly indifference spiced with the occasional vapid evil, or worse, a conscious one. I believe Thomas Wolfe wrote about 7 pounds of literature about that. Oh my God. So it's just like 1,000 things to talk about here, right? Like, obviously we circle back to the sedentary, unchanging small town, to which Matt is convinced there's no good here. There's indifference spiced with, I love the phrase vapid evil.
Yeah, that's such a thematically powerful statement here.
Mm-hmm.
Absolutely, yeah. I mean, this chapter, King is actively connecting this book with the existing canon of literature in a way that feels extremely Dark Tower, right?
Yeah.
Earlier, he's mentioned The Haunting of Hill House. Here, he references Thomas Wolfe. He's telling us where this story falls in that tradition, both literarily and thematically. He's not just referencing those stories. He's connecting thematically to those stories, and the idea of vapid evil existing within a sort of rural community, almost by its nature. And of course, just like with the Dark Tower, there's a kind of subtle invitation that maybe go check that out. Maybe you should go read The Haunting of Hill House.
Yeah, maybe you should. Everyone go read that book. It's really good. Yeah, but I mean, I love this, that this is this place of evil. We had this conversation where Ben kind of told Susan that he thinks that this is just a place that is evil. And then Matt kind of takes that and says, yes, it's this place of evil in the middle of town that observes all of our evilness. All of the badness in this entire town is like observed and consumed by this place, right? And it's not like, I love like indifference and vapid evil, which is almost like worse. Like, I think we see an example of that in this very bar in a few minutes, where there's this man just observing this passed out drunk and is just like, I'm just going to pee right next to his head.
Yeah.
What do I care?
I mean, it's a great description of the whole like lot interlude number 1, where you don't really see much good in there. No. You don't see much that's like super, super evil, but you see a lot of what you might call vapid evil and indifference.
Yeah, definitely.
I like the idea that, in a sense, Ben has rose-tinted glasses. He looks at the town as being the warm, glowing, nostalgic town of his youth, and then the Marston house up on the hill is this dark idol separate from the town. And whereas Matt, who's lived in the town his whole life, is like, no. The evil is throughout the town. The house is just the symbol of it.
Yeah. And this is what I love about this, because everything starts tying together, right? We have this beautiful section where he talks about the telephone wires and the gossip that goes through the town. This is a place in which everyone is doing bad things all the time, and everyone else knows about it because they're all talking about it. Everyone knows everyone else's business, and nobody's doing a goddamn thing about it. Like, that's the indifference, right? That's the souls trapped in the wires, because that's all they're doing is like the soul of the town is trapped in the gossip of this because there's no action. Nobody's doing anything.
Yeah. Yeah. It's interesting. I like that.
It's so good.
I kind of wonder where characters like Gillespie fall into this, because it's like, he's clearly, he seems to be the kind of guy who's trying to do good, but it's like the status quo kind of hems him in from really doing too much, I guess.
Yeah. Yeah. Well, and then you have interesting people like Matt here, who for all intents and purposes is a great person. But as we saw in his introduction, he's the type of person that is pranked against constantly. And his response to it is a kind of indifference. It's not warping him into an evil person himself, but he's not like doing anything about it either. Like I wonder what his response to bullying is. Like, we had that moment with Mark Petrie earlier last week that didn't occur in Matt's school, but like, what would Matt's response? Would Matt step in? Would Matt stop people from picking on other people? Would he stop those pranks if they're done to other teachers, to other students? What would he do?
Yeah, we don't really have much of an indication here.
But so, speaking of Matt, though, I just said some bad things about him. So let me say some good things about him here. Outside of this, the wonderfulness of this conversation for thematic purposes, I just want to talk about how great Matt Burke comes off by a lot of this. Because like, he starts this conversation about the Marston House saying that perhaps he would have written a book about it once, but he lacks the talent. And then when Ben describes the house as an idol, his reply is, that is talent. And he doesn't say this with jealousy. He doesn't say this with resentment. He doesn't look at Ben as this person that he could have been but wasn't able to. Like, you would almost kind of understand if a person felt this immense jealousy towards Ben. Ben is who at one point in his life he wanted to be. But he doesn't. He doesn't hate the stranger. He doesn't hate this person who came into the town to do the thing that he could never do. He seems to respect him. He likes him. He's just into him. And I don't know. It's just delightful. Like, it's one of those, once again, when we talked about Matt the first time, that it was kind of specifically trying to go against the old jaded teacher archetype. And here it is again. Yeah.
Matt's a dude who just sort of has it figured out. He's really the closest thing to just like a good dude. He's portrayed as being smart and wise, and he cares about people, and he works hard, and he's loyal to his friends, and he's tried to live a good life, and he has lived a good life, it seems. Really having a hard time thinking of another King character who's really like this, actually.
Yeah.
Oh, he does remind me of the thing that King sometimes does do, where like the elderly character will be sort of the wise old elf. And it's not, I don't remember how old he's, like in his 60s, right?
Yes.
So I don't know whether you want to call that elderly. I wouldn't personally. I mean, but
a 20-something person might. I would not.
Whatever age my parents are cannot be elderly, because then I would have to admit that they're getting old.
Yes, I too am not ready to say that.
Yeah, exactly.
Although I was at my parents' house today, and damn, my dad has decided to keep the air conditioning way too warm. It's like 76 degrees in there, and I'm like, Dad, my baby's crying because he's too hot. That's why he's fussy right now. Turn on the AC, please, for the love of God.
When my parents visited recently, they kept the thermostat at like 63 the whole time. So we apparently have some interestingly similar yet different problems.
When my dad comes over to my house, he just like goes to the car and gets a sweater to show me that my AC is on too cold.
Wow. Okay.
So he just gets cold at the drop of a hat because he's an old man, but he's not an old man because he's not allowed to be yet.
Yeah, exactly. They're not. So the point is that Matt is not elderly. But you could say that he sort of fits this role where if King is going to have a kind of perfect character, then they will be old.
So I guess this is the point where I ask you, what do you think his role in the story will be then? If you're right about him being that type of character.
Oh, that's a great question. I don't know. I don't have an initial feeling there, because usually the role of sort of the wise old elf mentor figure has been to sort of impart some important wisdom onto our protagonist, but not really to be active in the story, to sort of orbit and teach lessons, but rarely to be an active hand in the plot. And I guess I guess if I have to make a prediction, then I'll predict that something of that general shape is what happens here, where he's not, necessarily the guy who's running through the night with a stake in his hand, but maybe strategizing or providing important pieces of wisdom and insight to our characters.
Yeah, this is when I wish I could make a Buffy reference, but you wouldn't understand it because
I wouldn't.
You're a jerk.
Absolutely,
but he would be the Giles in the situation.
Yeah, you know what? I get the reference anyway. So good.
Good. Just like through osmosis, you're going to learn everything about Buffy.
Yeah, exactly.
And then you're going to watch it one day and be like, "Oh yeah, I already know all this."
Right. Yeah, I've basically already seen the show.
So, just circle back on what we were talking about. Matt has so much respect for Ben that he asks him to come to his creative writing class and give a lecture. Like, he's so not guarded in his, like, there's no resentment or jealousy there that he said, actually, can you come talk to my kids? Because I know they'd appreciate learning from a published author. And he, of course, agrees to do it because they're two great dudes.
Just two buds. Yeah, this is one of those moments where you smile, remembering that King was both an English teacher and is now a writer, and so now he's writing about the experience of being asked to talk about his work in a high school English class, and just that's kind of a delightful thought.
Yeah, definitely. Their conversation is kind of interrupted though when Ben gets worried about good old Weasel and goes and finds him passed out in the bathroom. This is where that detail that we were talking about earlier, where we see a drunk man is passed out on the floor next to a urinal, and there's just another drunk dude there pissing inches from his head. Because he just doesn't give a fuck. Which, just what a town, Matt. What a town.
And there's going to be some spray. We all know that. I'm just going to say it out loud. There's going to be some backsplash, some splatter, as it were. Yeah. It really emphasizes that, what Matt just said about evil. It's like, we haven't seen much in this town that would really elevate to the level of good. More like people just kind of doing what they have to. And we haven't seen much that reaches down to the level of real evil. From the townspeople, setting aside the vampire stuff. But yeah, we've seen a lot of this kind of petty, vapid evil. Just like this. Yeah.
So Ben and Matt help Weasel to Ben's car, and he drives his boarding house buddy home. We get there, and Eva Miller is up waiting for them. And this is, I think, one of the most tragic moments in all of this week's reading here. As he begins to work on Weasel's shoes, Eva Miller says from behind him, "Never mind that, Mr. Mears. Go on up if you like. But he ought to be. I'll undress him." Her face was grave and full of dignified, measured sadness. "Undress him and give him alcohol rub to help with his hangover in the morning. I've done it before. Many times." So we talked last week about like how much of Weasel's section of the chapter was focused on kind of this attraction, this maybe love of Eva Miller. And here we see that she is not only like providing him with work to do and a place to live, but she is taking care of him. And it's tragic. Like, it's sad.
Yeah.
And that, like, you understand, like, he still loves her and she obviously cares for him deeply, but the reason they're not like in a relationship or having sex anymore is because he's almost like a child to her that she's taking care of.
Yeah, it's very bittersweet. I don't feel that I clearly understand what the dynamic is, but it does seem like she is very fond of him and maybe even loves him, but like you said, can't really see him as like her man because of how far he's fallen. But yeah, I mean, I'm very invested in the evolution of the Eva Weasel relationship at this point.
Her face was grave and full of dignified, measured sadness.
Yeah.
That's so wonderful.
Yeah.
I mean, maybe it speaks to that kind of that there's no good in this place, just at best indifference. Like, and it's not that Ava is indifferent of Weasel. She's taking care of him, but also like she's not helping him. He has a disease and he's killing himself with this disease, and like she's cleaning up after him and making sure he feels okay in the morning, but she's not like, she's also enabling him in a lot of ways.
That's interesting. I mean, part of me, and like this thought seems ignorant even as I say it, but I'm like, did they not know about alcoholism in the 70s?
They definitely did.
I feel like they did. So.
I think they did. I don't think AA as a thing was as prominent. It definitely existed, but
I think to give myself a bit more credibility there, what I mean is like the language you just used of referring to alcoholism as a disease, I think is a more modern framing for it.
Yeah.
But even so, what Matt says, in this chapter is like, yeah, the alcohol got a hold of him, and it's like, yeah, that's basically saying the same thing you just said. It's just a little bit more esoteric, metaphorical wording. So yeah,
it's just really sad. Poor Weasel.
Yep.
All right, that is it for the week. We kind of already talked about our Dark Tower connections. I want to maybe briefly just talk about like the ideal of this like true just incarnate evil that like exists both in this book and obviously in the Dark Tower. There's just like places and forms of evil that are just there and that draws evil people to it. I think that we see that a lot in the Dark Tower. Yeah.
The idea of an evil place, the idea of evil that sort of perpetuates itself. I think it's hard for me to come down too hard on what exactly he's saying because the book hasn't ended, so we don't know.
Sure.
We don't know, if it ends with the Marston house still standing. Like if they defeat the vampires, but the Marston house is left standing, then that will sort of be an indication of like, well, good, you defeated the vampire, but like you couldn't really get rid of the evil. Whereas like, I feel like it could end differently than that. Like they could,
if the house is destroyed, what does that say?
If the house is destroyed and the vampires are, but maybe destroying the house is only possible after the whole town has been killed anyway. And then it's like, well, what was really accomplished here?
I mean, I will remind you that the whole like setup of the story is that two characters have fled Salem's Lot,
right,
and now have learned that things are still happening there and are having to return.
Exactly. Yeah. I mean, I don't know. I have more questions at this point, but yeah, no, I like just to loop back around. The idea of an evil house is clearly a Dark Tower connection. And I have to assume that in context of the Dark Tower, the Marston house is one of these like demonic places.
Sure.
And involuntarily, I have to confess that a Dark Tower movie reference just jumped into my mind.
Oh no.
Am I allowed to make those?
I don't think there's anything specifically against it, but I mean, I think there will have to be at least one public lashing.
Yeah, some kind of penalty.
Yeah.
For doing it. But so at one point somebody says like the kid got past the house demon, as if a house demon is like a thing. There are house demons.
Yeah, they're everywhere.
It's a
demon that's a house. Right. What more do you want?
There's no elaboration. It's just it is so it's probably a house demon in the Marston house.
I hate it.
Me too.
I'm sorry. I think it. God damn it! I think there's a lot to this. I mean, we had a whole discussion question back in the day where we asked what is evil in the King universe, and we are seeing another example of King's view of evil here. And I love, to repeat myself again, this is a vampire story in which we haven't met the guy yet.
Right.
We haven't even seen the coffin. We think it's in that thing. We don't know. It is a story that has almost entirely focused on the town and that house at the top of the town. And so vampires are like a metaphor.
Uh-huh.
And I think that it's an interesting thing because like the vampires in the Dark Tower were never the end all be all either. They always were working for something else or represented something else or went or did something else. So it's fun to see that here, even back in 1975, he was still doing that same exact thing.
Yep, absolutely.
That the real story here is about Salem's Lot itself, not the bloodsuckers.
That's a good point.
All right. Well, let's move on to our discussion question section. Matt, last week we asked our listeners, what is your favorite fictional town? And we got quite a few good answers. I will say, folks, if you're wondering, we kind of moved our recording date for these. We moved them earlier in the week, so I had a little bit more time to edit the episodes before it came out on Thursday. So if you don't hear yours here, it's not because we didn't like your answer or we're ignoring you. It's just that we had already recorded by the time you sent yours in. So sorry about that. We are recording on Sunday nights now.
Yeah. Right. Which
when we're on schedule, which is rare. But tonight we're recording on Sunday night.
Which basically means that you're much more likely to have your answer read if you write it sooner than later.
Yes. Yes.
All right. The first answer comes from Baby Can You Dig Your Sam? They say, the day before I began reading Salem's Lot again, we decided to introduce our teenagers to the world of Twin Peaks. Turns out that Twin Peaks is a very nice companion piece of this book. Part soap opera, part murder mystery, part supernatural thriller, Twin Peaks broke the mold for the standard network hour-long drama and has been a heavy influence on the medium ever since. Both stories center around the small towns where things aren't quite as nice as they appear. Agent Cooper serves as our protagonist, who, like Ben Mears, finds himself charmed by the town. Agent Cooper delights in Twin Peaks' quaintness and its inhabitants' peculiarities and picadillos. Similar to Chapter 3, the first episode of Twin Peaks finds the viewer meandering about town, meeting the various characters and the archetypes they represent, seeing how their lives intertwine with each other and how they all seem to have secrets. And we're also introduced to the supernatural element that we later come to know as Bob. Wood-paneled walls, pine trees swaying in the wind, haunting waterfalls, and lots of Pacific Northwest rain serve to enforce the setting. But in the end, it's the people that matter. A town, after all, is just the name of a place. It's the people who live there that give the town its personality, its soul. That was really fucking well written, Baby Can You Dig Your Sam?
I always love your answers, Baby Can You Dig Your Sam? Thank you for sharing. Twin Peaks is wonderful, and Matt has to tell everyone that he's never watched it.
Never watched it.
Yeah.
Sorry.
We're going to have to do that one day. Like, we... on our Deconstructing Director series on our other podcast, like, we specifically did not do David Lynch because we can't figure out a way to cover Twin Peaks in a time sensitive manner.
Right.
So we're going to have to find a way to approach that one day, because that is a show with a lot to talk about. And I think you would enjoy it.
Yeah. I mean, find a way to do it in a way where it doesn't become our life for 2 years the way this has.
I don't know how to do anything else.
Yeah, there are no half measures with deep media.
All right, next we have I'm Your Density, who says, I will say Pine Deep, Pennsylvania, which is the town in Jonathan Mayberry's Pine Deep trilogy. I actually picked up these books after the host of the Stephen King cast, not to be confused with the King cast. There's a lot of we all have King in the name, so it doesn't help. Recommended them a few years ago. He described them as the perfect Halloween story, and I think that's undeniable. Werewolves, vampires, zombies, or at least undead, and ghosts make appearances throughout the trilogy as an evil force tries to resurrect itself. It's really fantastic. There are 3 books, Ghost Road Blues, Dead Man's Song, and Bad Moose Rising, but Mayberry also wrote 5 short stories that, as far as I know, have only been released in an audiobook called Tales from Pine Deep. That was also pretty good.
Cool. I've never heard of this at all. So thanks.
Me either.
For putting that
I kind of want to check that out. Yeah.
Yeah.
Pine Deep, Pennsylvania. That's a good name. That's a really good name. I can kind of close my eyes and imagine what Pine Deep, Pennsylvania is like.
That's the fun thing about all these town names like Twin Peaks and Pine Deep. It's like it gives you this kind of cold, chill image of wilderness with a little town nestled within it.
Yeah.
All right. Pear Jane says, my favorite fictional town is the opposite of Salem's Lot. It's a small town whose secret underbelly is that everyone is generous, kind, and exactly what the world should be in 2021. Schitt's Creek surprised me in so many ways. It's a city/country mouse story. The classic shallow city folk learn to understand they should be like salt of the earth country folk, But the twist is that the country folk are also weird and also learn from the Roses and genuinely like people both because of and in spite of their differences. The Roses learn their value as a family, and the town characters' horizons are broadened. Plus, it's funny as hell. I'm so grateful my kids have television like this so they know that whether they're straight, gay, pan, ace, or undecided, there are places in the world that will celebrate their joys and soothe their sorrows.
Very good answer.
Yeah, I've only seen a few episodes of Schitt's Creek, but I did think it was unbelievably good, actually. Yeah.
It's delightful, and it's a tough sell for some people because it takes a little bit of time to get to the show that Pear Jane is talking about. Like, I think it starts off very standard in almost Arrested Development-esque, where these people just suck and you're just supposed to laugh at how much they suck. And then it transforms and becomes something beautiful and heartwarming and wonderful. It's a really great show. Everyone should watch it.
Yeah, I think what you may be right. I enjoyed the first episodes just because Eugene Levy and Catherine O'Hara are comic geniuses.
Yeah, I mean, don't get me wrong. Like, I still found all those hilarious as well. But like, it was a funny show that became more than just that as it went along.
Yeah, and
the ending was just, TV makes me cry a lot, and that certainly did it.
Awesome.
So we have Bell West Deserved Better. Says, my favorite fictional town has to be Innsmouth, Massachusetts, the eponymous location of H.P. Lovecraft's The Shadow over Innsmouth. It's the ultimate creepy horror story town with a dark secret. Lovecraft employs his signature purple prose to describe the rundown and half-sunken architecture of this closed-off seaside village and its bizarre and menacing denizens. Without any spoilers, the narrator visits Innsmouth and discovers its dark secrets and perhaps a little about himself in an escalating series of encounters with the locals, ultimately leading to his attempt to escape with his life and sanity intact. The setting of Innsmouth has always stuck with me as a quintessential scary middle of nowhere place you don't want to find yourself in, especially after dark.
God, there's so many of these classics that like I just know, like they're on my list of like, oh yeah, obviously I should read this, but no, I haven't. I've only really read like one Lovecraft thing. I've
never read a word of Lovecraft, and I really need to. It's like I know the guy was a dick, but he's also dead now, so I feel no qualms about reading his stuff.
Well, yeah. Super influential, obviously.
Yeah, obviously, yeah.
I think that I'm just going to commit to reading this particular story.
That's a good easy way to ease your way into it, because I have no half measure. So when I say I'm going to read Lovecraft, I'll just be like, I'm going to read every single thing he ever wrote, which is why I don't ever start those projects. But yeah, just reading this one, I think is achievable.
I forget the name of the story that I read. I think it was like The Rats in the Walls or something like that. I don't know. That was just like a short story. So. Mm-hmm. All right. The next answer comes from Walking Dude 22. When it comes to fictional towns, it's not so much a specific town as a type of town. I think of all those little unnamed hamlets in the Twilight Zone. Mayberry with a mysterious twist. I feel like King's Big Three fit this mold: Castle Rock, Derry, Salem's Lot. These towns appeal to nostalgia with their Uncle Sam and apple pie, but the stories set in these towns explore the deeper humanity of their characters in contrast to these ideal images. Mm-hmm. What is it? I mean, there's definitely this thing that we're talking about that we're kind of gesturing at with all of these, where there's this idea where we all kind of, in part of our mind, want to imagine that like you drive through some little town, maybe on a road trip, and you stop for gas and you look around, and like part of you wants to imagine that these people are cannibals.
Like, whoa! I did not see this coming.
But no, like this is it's the Twilight Zone thing. It's the idea that actually this is the children of the Corn Town. Actually, there's a vampire here. Like what is it that's intrinsically frightening? I think it might be just the fear of being the stranger, or the fear of a community that you don't really know. You don't really know what their deal is.
Yeah.
Maybe they want to sacrifice you to their god. You can't really be sure that that's not the case.
I swear to God, I thought you were about to say, what is it about these quaint, like beautiful towns that just entrance us? And then you went way somewhere else.
180.
No, I do think like it is just this idea of taking like what we've been told is like quintessential Americana, and then rooting for something underneath it, right? And so like this idea that like there is this thing we understand and idealize, and the reality underneath it is inherently fascinating for us. And yeah, I do think there's something to the idea of like, especially when people didn't travel as much, they're like entering a new town and the inherent fear of being a new person in a place where everyone else is already broken off. And like it goes back to the tribal nature of us, right? That like you're entering into a place where everyone already has their tribe and you are alone, and that is inherently terrifying.
Absolutely. Yeah. I mean, it's places like shopping malls are so incredibly unnatural because we were never supposed to be around hundreds and hundreds of people that we don't know. Like that's on some level, your brain is always agitated in that circumstance, actually.
Sure. Yeah. So it's the extroverts who are wrong.
Exactly. I've always known that.
ALH 84001 says, I mean, it's got to be Springfield from The Simpsons, right? No other fictional town has existed and evolved for over 30 years. Their motto created a word that's now in the dictionary, for crying out loud. A noble spirit embiggens the smallest man indeed. Did they really put embiggens in the dictionary?
I would believe it.
Amazing. Springfield quite literally embodies the cliche of the town as a character, when they often, and with little provocation, form into torch-wielding mobs. The rivers are horribly polluted, the mayor's corrupt and unabashedly lascivious, but it's filled with insane and unforgettable characters that have shaped many generations' sense of humors. Who wouldn't want to live with a town once dubbed America's crud bucket?
I have to agree. The Simpsons is basically the writer's attempt to make a caricature of America personified in a town.
Yeah.
And Homer Simpson is the character of the American personified in a man.
Yes. And then it stopped being good, but that's okay.
It had a lot of good stuff in there. All right. Hulkxanthus says, I love the movie Pleasantville. It is the essence of what we think the bygone days were like, then forced to evolve into something real because of the influx of truth, passion, and choice. Maybe not a perfect movie, but it still has a fond place in my memories.
Yeah,
I saw that movie when it came out, and I was like not old enough to process it in any useful way. And then I saw it again more recently, and I was like, oh shit, it's really well done. I like this a lot.
It is doing a lot of things that this book is kind of doing, and dealing with the obsession with nostalgia and nostalgic thoughts coming into conflict with realism.
Absolutely.
With the reality of the world.
Yeah.
Jennifer D says, my favorite fictional town is easily Derry, Maine. The Derry interludes are the best part of it and illustrate how pervasive and evil the town really is. The old timers in Derry know the secrets, but chooses to ignore them and carry on like everything's fine. Whenever we get back and visit Derry and other stories like Insomnia, Dreamcatcher, and 11/22/63, I'm instantly hooked.
Excellent. I can say nothing about this really, but I mean, I guess I've seen Dreamcatcher, so.
But now you know. Well, it's weird that your first like written Derry trip will be Insomnia.
Yeah, that does strike me as a little bit strange because it seems like that's kind of a outlier book.
We'll see.
Yeah. All right. Next, Eric T says Night Vale from the podcast and Associated Books. Welcome to Night Vale. It's a pretty neat place. You see through a local radio station's news broadcasts and local updates where anything, literally anything, can happen. It's both Orwellian and Lovecraftian. The municipal leadership, for instance, the city council, is a multi-body being comprised of a set of bureaucrats. Being mayor gives one many powers, like special parking places or invisibility. The sheriff's secret police watch everyone always. So to make their lives easier, citizens are encouraged to have all conversations loudly and clearly near an open window. Ghost cars, UFOs, the house that isn't there, but is between two other houses that look just like it, so it would make more sense for it to be there, but science tells us it isn't. Masked giants, and teeth. So many teeth. More teeth than can possibly fit in your mouth, no matter how widely you smile. So please stop extending your smile. It looks like you passed comfortable a long time ago. But how do you have so many teeth? So many teeth. That's basically that's great, Eric T. That's a kind of sampler of the surreal joyride that is Night Vale.
I adore that show. I've stopped listening because I just feel like There's only so many times you can you can listen to that stuff. I mean, it's not that it's repetitive. It's just like it had a shelf life for me, and I adored every single episode I listened to. But
yeah, I kind of I had the same experience where I liked it. Like I liked it a lot for a while, and then at a certain point, I think for me it was like there aren't really any characters for me to sink my teeth into, and maybe that changed later on. I know that it went on for like quite a long time, but it seemed like it was just like, this is fun, but I could listen to these episodes like in any order and it wouldn't really matter. Maybe I'm just dumb and there was all sorts of plot happening that I just wasn't getting. But anyway, it's really fun though. It's worth checking out at least for sure.
Sure. Last but not least, we have Steve L., who says, the temple hanging in the air is the first and best town I could think of. It's on the world of Tian Shan in the final book of the Hyperion series. The description of the architecture, construction, supports, beauty, and toughness are ingrained in my brain. The deep meanings discussed there are so profound, I can close my eyes and picture it. It's mesmerizing. And yes, I will keep bugging you about finishing the series until I die. It's simply the best sci-fi out there. I went back and listened to your podcast on the first book. Matt's major complaint was that the book left you hanging. Of course it does. It's a 2-book series. You have to read the second book to get the whole story. Steve, I'm totally with you on here. We've put this book on our book club vote twice, and it hasn't won. The sequel to Hyperion. So we're trying.
And we can't read it unless it wins the book club vote.
We're not allowed to.
Yeah, no,
it's the rules.
I want to read it. I do. I think it came across in that book club episode that I really loved that book. So
I adored it. I did. Yeah. It was so good.
Yeah.
All right. Thank you everyone who sent those in. Great answers as usual. Here's next week's question. Matt, you want to read it?
What makes a house creepy? And how do authors like King and Shirley Jackson use those elements to create a spooky house?
Talk to us about spooky houses.
I love spooky houses.
I think it's going to be a fun one.
I'm actually really excited to hear answers here because I haven't thought much about this, but it seems like a fun problem.
I think it is. And we will hear the answers to that question on next week's episode, in which we will continue with Chapter 6, The Lot 2, and Chapter 7, Matt. Matt doesn't have a number after his name, which means it's the only Matt chapter. But don't worry, Matt, he'll be fine.
Is this how you pull me into the doorway? Remember, you can reach us via email at kingslingerspod@gmail.com or on Twitter at kingslingerspod. And of course, the subreddit, reddit.com/r/doofmedia, is a great place to answer the discussion question, or to just hang out.
Yes, and you can subscribe to Kingslingers on Apple Podcasts, Stitcher, Spotify, YouTube, Google Play, and pretty much anywhere in the world that there are podcasts, and, beyond the world. There's other levels of the towers. They don't even call them podcasts there, but you can still subscribe.
That's true. I wonder what they do call them. Let us know. I don't know. What do they call them? If you're listening to this podcast from another level of the tower, contact us somehow.
What's it like there?
Do they play that instrument that Blaine talked about?
Yeah, that one.
You know what I'm talking about. You know what I mean? If you like any of our shows and you want to support them, then please consider donating to our Patreon account, which on this level of the tower is called patreon.com/doofmedia. Special thanks this week to new patrons, new Doof Dancer Vice Versailles, and new Doof Trooper Brian H. Welcome. We hope you enjoy the cool stuff that we have at those tiers. There's a whole podcast channel that you can sign up to that you're only entitled to if you are donating, and it'll make your day.
It will. So much good stuff. Yeah. So much good stuff there. And don't forget that the vote for book club is happening right now, only exclusive to our patrons. So if you want to influence the decision of what books we read each and every month for our monthly book club, that is the place to do it.
All right.
Of course, if you cannot afford to donate, that's absolutely okay. You can help us out by sharing this podcast with all the Stephen King lovers out there, because this is a good freaking book, Matt. This is a really good book, and people really love this book, and I'm sure they want to listen to people talk for way too long about this wonderful book.
I'm certain you're right.
You can also help us by leaving us a rating and a review. This week's Spotlight review comes from Cici Pinla, who gives us 5 stars and says, skeptical and intimidating, but so glad I started listening. I love Stephen King's Dark Tower series and have for many years. I've read through the entire series at least 3 times over the last 20 years, and so I am a constant reader and have been since about the age of 13. I subscribed and downloaded this podcast a few months ago, but couldn't bring myself to begin listening. Each episode is 2+ hours long. Sorry. And I didn't think I had time to devote to listening to them. Also, I've never listened to any of their other podcasts, so I wasn't sure if I was going to enjoy their analysis of a series that I hold so dear. I was worried it was going to be too critical and complain about the series, or maybe it would be a technical analysis of the writing and the story that would be boring to a non-writer. I finally decided to give it a shot since a lot of podcasts are only doing repeat episodes over the Christmas, New Year's holidays. I am very glad I finally started listening. I finished the Gunslinger episode, and I'm loving reliving the details of the book through Matt and Scott's discussions. The hosts are fantastic at analyzing and writing without putting off a listener who generally doesn't think too deeply about that. Honestly, I wasn't sure what to expect from this podcast, and I'm very happy with it. It brings me joy to hear about some of my favorite characters and hear about them from another person's perspective. It's been great to hear them discuss some of the imagery and allegory that I didn't catch when reading it, or that I simply forgotten. It is especially fun to hear Matt, as a new reader to the story, try to figure out what is happening, and to hear Scott trying not to give things away. I can't wait to hear what Matt thinks of the next book.
Oh, thank you.
So nice. Yeah. That was so nice.
That was very nice. And we're really glad we were able to bring you some joy, because that's why we do this.
Yeah. And I love the beat about like not being too technical to that it scares away people that don't think about writing. That's kind of our goal, right? Like, we love getting nerdy about writing, but we want to do it in a way that's palatable to people that don't give a shit about that.
Yeah. There's a fine line, I guess. Like, I guess I'm just the approach, not to get too philosophical about it here at the very end of the podcast, but my approach is to just try to authentically relate my experience of what I'm reading.
Yeah, definitely.
And that can be complicated or that can be simple. It kind of depends.
So thank you so much, CC Pinla. I don't know if you're listening to this episode or not, but or if you're still going through the backlog, but if you get here and listen to this, thank you.
Yeah, thanks so much.
All right, folks, that is finally it for us. We'll see you back here next week as we read 2 more chapters of Salem's Lot. Maybe we'll even see a vampire. Long days and pleasant nights.
And you have twice the number.